Coming up on the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast, hospitals in rural Indiana are feeling the pinch from the pandemic. A major project in Fort Wayne comes a step closer to getting underway. A 17-year-old Hoosier entrepreneur looks to provide PPE for healthcare and nursing home employees. We take a look at the new Fishers AgriPark. The new president of DePauw University joins us to share her vision. An Indiana publishing company marks 20 years in business. Plus, we get a preview of the Indy Burger Battle. Welcome to the Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. I'm Alex Brown. The American Hospital Association is projecting that hospitals and health systems throughout the country could lose more than $320 billion this year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In Indiana, it is estimated that 8 rural hospitals are at risk for closing this year. Indiana Hospital Association President Brian Tabor joined Business of Health reporter Kylie Valletta this week to talk about the impact on Hoosier hospitals.
Well, let's talk first about the causes of this financial strain for hospitals, because some are obvious, but others not so obvious. So we already mentioned the drop in outpatient services and the use of the ER, but what other costs did hospitals have to shoulder?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the same time, throughout this pandemic, what we saw was as revenue fell, as is described earlier, costs rose. And there was a tremendous amount of resources expended into increasing the capacity that we needed to address COVID here in the state of Indiana. I'm just so proud of the work of the nurses, the physicians, the facility staff, everyone in the hospital community who worked so hard to very quickly adapt and expand what we needed to address this health emergency. So working very closely with our amazing state health leaders, Dr. Christina Box and others, we were able to do things like expand the number of intensive care beds from 900 to well over 1,400 in just 3 weeks. And that took reconfiguring facilities and capital expenses. It took the purchasing of scarce and expensive equipment and supplies and work around the clock. Now, in a similar fashion, we were able to increase the number of ventilators available to patients throughout the state of Indiana to almost 2,500. That was an increase of 74% from the baseline. And we are committed to maintaining that high state of readiness. And I just want to applaud the work of the thousands of healthcare and hospital workers throughout the state who made that possible.
And like you mentioned, those huge jumps all come with costs as well. So Indiana hospitals in general reported negative operating margin. That means total expenses were greater than total revenues. And that number for general hospitals was minus 8.3%. But it's even worse for rural hospitals. They're reporting negative operating margins more than triple that at 28%. What are your thoughts when it comes to rural hospitals in Indiana right now?
I was worried. I think a lot of folks had concerns about the future of our rural healthcare safety net before the pandemic. And I think with the impact, the financial toll that we've had because of COVID, some of those facilities, I think they face an even more uncertain future, which is why we really need policies to support them. But they're working hard to make sure that they're there for their communities. There was a national study by an entity called Guidehouse, kind of a consulting research firm, and they looked at Indiana hospitals and found that before COVID, 31% of Indiana's rural hospitals were at high risk, high financial risk. So that's already a warning sign before we even got into the period that we're in now. And it's just so important, not just for the immediate public health needs that we have right now to battle this outbreak, but also for the long-term viability for those rural communities. The vitality, the ability to attract future economic development really depends on having a strong healthcare system. So this is not a time when we can afford to have those rural hospitals close. And really there has been a different kind of epidemic, but we've seen this rash of rural hospital closures around the country. Fortunately, Indiana has been so far has not mostly really seen that yet, but that trend has occurred in some of our neighboring states, particularly in the South, some of the western states, and we just want to make sure that doesn't happen here in Indiana.
So what do you think it will take for Indiana hospitals to recover, and does policy play a role in that?
I think public policy plays a huge role. When you have a crisis of this magnitude, we really need the help of our federal and state partners. And I want to laud the efforts of our congressional delegation. Since the beginning of this journey, our representatives, our senators have been reaching out to IHA, reaching out to their local hospitals, and keeping their finger on the pulse of what was happening on the ground. So asking about the shortages of personal protective equipment, asking about the other supplies that were needed for testing and critical drugs that are needed. They've really continued that dialogue. So I think they really had a sense of how great the need was. And through policies like the CARES Act that was passed and signed into law, the funding through the CARES Act is absolutely critical. There are certainly hospitals that would not be open today at this point in the summer if that legislation hadn't been passed. So there's more public policy being debated right now with important elements on the table. For example, there's an important Medicare advanced loan program that we hope will be extended in terms of the payback. That's really important to hospitals. But I feel very confident that with the kind of collaboration we've seen and coordination between our state and federal partners, that public policy will continue to support the readiness of Indiana hospitals.
Still to come, a 17-year-old entrepreneur adds to the growing list of PPE suppliers, and we visit a new AgriPark in our Around Indiana segment. But first, some big news in Fort Wayne last week as developers of the $440 million Electric Works project announced a lease agreement with Do It Best Corporation to become the project's anchor tenant. The largest privately held company in Indiana will make Electric Works its global headquarters, occupying 200,000 square feet on the west campus of the sprawling former General Electric complex. Fort Wayne-based Do It Best has some 450 employees in Allen County and expects to grow that number by 20% at its new headquarters. Gary Dick talked with RTM Ventures partner Jeff Kingsbury and Wygand Construction CEO Larry Wygand, and Kingsbury calls Do It Best the ideal tenant.
Couldn't ask for a better one, Gary, because fundamentally business builders. They help entrepreneurs and business owners not only throughout the United States in thousands of locations, but globally as well in 50 countries. So that's what they do best, is really help people build businesses and fulfill their dreams. But having them in one of the largest renovation projects in the Midwest makes a lot of sense from a mission standpoint too. And again, they are the type of people, the type of leaders that are committed to their community. And that's the kind of people we want to have at Electric Works.
Now, Wygand Construction says it has all of the permits in place to begin construction this fall. It is estimated that the 2-year construction phase could support some 2,000 construction and related jobs. Estimates say the economic impact on the region could be more than $200 million during construction.
When you think about, what is happening, economically, to have a kind of a prepackaged construction project of this magnitude coming to Allen County, coming to Fort Wayne, it's extraordinary. So the scope of the project is what we're calling West Campus, and it's a total revitalization and rehab of these historic buildings, and extensive site work, plaza work, and then we're going into each and every one of the buildings, close to 700,000 square feet. And we're renovating and bringing them up to code and getting them ready for the tenants. And the tenants are an array of different companies that provide different services. And it's just going to be a unique campus setting.
Now, developers say they're confident financing will come together for a closing in September and perhaps project beginning construction. Long talked about project beginning in October.
Later in the podcast, Mary Rachel Redmond takes us inside the new Fishers AgriPark, and we meet the new president of DePauw University. But now, high school student William Teasley saw the challenges facing first responders during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's when WillTech was born. The 17-year-old is using a 3D printer to make face shields, first focusing on first responders, but now he's making them for schools. Teasley joined Gary Dick to talk about his efforts.
This is a great story. We don't have teenage entrepreneurs on very often, but certainly you're the exception. You're an incoming senior at Cathedral High School, an engineering entrepreneur. And this whole idea to make face shields really started with your cousin, who is a nurse, I think, at Community East Hospital. Talk about how Wiltec really came about.
Yeah, so it all started my cousin, who is a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit at Community East. She was telling me how face shields are getting hard to come by. So I saw people doing it online, and I borrowed my stepbrother's 3D printer, and I started making face shields 5 or 6 a week. And then my dad was looking to buy face shields for his schools, and he has about 500 employees. And he was saying that prices were way too high. And so I told him if I could find a way to automate the process, I could make some for him at a fraction of the cost that he was finding them for. Yep. So I got a loan from him, and I bought 2 3D printers, and I spent about a week developing a special G-code or a process that could automate the 3D printing process. And so that's how Wiltec was born.
It's great how it started. Your dad, Kevin, who's the CEO at the Geo Foundation, your mom, an attorney, gave you some legal help as well. But this has really been on you to start this business and grow it. So you started with making for first responders, but now school systems and schools are buying the product. Talk about that and how that's increased, that demand has increased for your face shields.
Yeah, well, at first, I was making 5 or 6 a week for my cousin, or 5 or 6 a day, 20 a week for my cousin. And then now that I'm selling for schools, there's a larger volume being demanded. So I had to automate the process to be able to achieve this high volume. And I've sold to 11 schools so far, and I've shipped about 1,000 face shields. Yep.
Hey, William, we've only got 30 seconds left. You are headed to, eventually, right, to MIT. What are you going to major in?
I hope to go to MIT and major in astronautical engineering.
Okay, that is an impressive goal, but you're going to keep Wiltec in place, intact, right, as going forward?
Yeah, I hope to stay true to Wiltec's mission statement, which is to solve humanity's problems through engineering.
Remember, you can catch Inside Indiana Business Television on stations throughout the state every weekend. Head to InsideIndianaBusiness.com to check listings. Still to come, the first woman and person of color to lead DePauw University begins her tenure, and an Indiana publishing company is celebrating 2 decades in business. But first, it's been 2 years in the making, a project like any other, not only in the greater Indianapolis area, but by all accounts, maybe around the country. Nestled on 33 acres of land in Hamilton County is Fishers AgriPark. Around Indiana reporter Mary Rachel Redmond got a sneak peek and has details.
The city of Fishers is going back to its roots on the farm.
The concept was really to bring agriculture to the front doorstep of so many Fishers residents that are probably second generation off the farm and are kind of losing contact with agriculture. And so this was an opportunity to create that.
Fishers AgriPark is a working 33-acre urban farm where visitors will have the opportunity to learn up-to-date farming practices. Fishers Park and Recreation Program Manager Jackie Liu says education is the foundation for the new park.
I think education is really important at a farm. It's not something that's really common knowledge if you really think about it. With the produce, how to plant it, how to water it, the best way, if it needs to start in a greenhouse, if we can plant it directly into the ground.
What we really want to do here is teach people not only about agriculture, but the business of agriculture. Farmers are some of the original entrepreneurs that we've had in our country, and particularly in this state.
And when you're out on the farm, there's bound to be animals. Fishers AgriPark is no exception.
Well, it gives the community the opportunity to get to know our cows and horse and sheep and chickens and learn a little bit more about where their food comes from and all of the aspects of a working farm.
Other featured amenities include a tunnel-covered growing area, nature trails, and a 3-acre produce garden where visitors will be able to pick their own garden variety foods free of charge. And there's more.
Well, in addition to our 3 acres of produce, we also have a pumpkin patch, we have a sunflower field, we have a tree nursery, and when those trees mature a little bit, we'll use them to replace trees that have passed in our parks. We also have 10 acres of field corn planted that will turn into a small corn maze this year. And we have a kids play area, nature-themed play area.
But when this 33-acre piece of land was originally donated to the city in 2018, it was a far cry from what it looks like now. Enter 23-year-old farmer Trevor Wildy.
It's grown a lot from when we first saw it. When I first took on this property, it was all grown up pretty bad in weeds and trash and debris.
And believe it or not, just a few short months ago, this beautiful array of produce was actually 33 acres of weeds as high as my waist.
Mother Nature didn't give us too hard of a time this year, but we were pretty blessed with the way everything turned out.
And perhaps the park's most enduring legacy will be its commitment to tackling food insecurity throughout the community.
Food insecurity is real. It's happening here in Fishers. It's happening everywhere in Indiana.
The community helps grow food, and then we give the food back to the community. I think that's a closed loop. We'll be able to help a lot of people.
And the folks at Fishers AgriPark say ultimately their goal is to inspire a future generation of farmers.
Just because they live in a city doesn't mean they can't go into an agriculture field later down the road.
Mary Rachel Redman, Inside Indiana Business.
Later in the podcast, Cardinal Publishing Group marks 20 years and we get a look at the Indy Burger Battle. But now, meet DePauw University's new president, Dr. Lori White. She has made history becoming the first woman and first person of color to lead the small private institution in Greencastle. She took over about a month ago, and like other administrators in higher education, she is facing unprecedented challenges. How to navigate through the pandemic as the fall semester draws closer. She joined us this week to give more on her vision for the university.
As mentioned, university presidents everywhere grappling with this back to school, back to campus issue. You recently announced the DePauw plan, a staggered approach, freshmen and sophomore reporting late August, juniors and seniors next spring. How challenging a process was that, and what do you hope to accomplish with this plan?
Well, there's certainly no playbook for how to lead the campus during COVID-19. And I know presidents across the country very much would like to welcome all of their students back this fall. However, as we've seen the resurgence of the virus across the country, we made the decision that we needed to depopulate our campus and open our campus at about 50% capacity. And in making that decision, invited our first and our second year students to have priority for this fall. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to open back up in the spring with all of our students. But if not, then our seniors and juniors would have priority for in residence in the spring.
You've had a number of key positions in universities around the country, most recently Washington University in St. Louis, where you were vice chancellor for student affairs. What really, bottom line, what attracted you to the opportunity at DePauw?
What attracted me is throughout my career, I have known alumni from DePauw. And 201, they talked about the transformative educational experience that they had as DePauw students. And I also saw the incredible network that DePauw alumni had across the country to mentor students, offer students employment opportunities, and how proud they were to be DePauw Tigers. And so when I was not and I had a chance to experience the campus for myself. And you mentioned in the introduction that I am the first woman president and the first African-American president. When I went to Meharry Hall, which is where the portraits of the former presidents hang, and I saw the space where I am president number 21 at DePauw, where my portrait might hang, I thought to myself, you know, Lori, this is not about you. This is about you creating inspiration, I hope, for future generations. So for young women, for young people of color to know that they too can aspire to be presidents of colleges and universities across the country.
Yeah, it's a great story. As you look at DePauw University, your vision for the school, what would you like to see DePauw become?
Well, I certainly want to make sure that we are the very best liberal arts college in the entire country. I also want to make sure that we are fully accessible to every student who desires a DePauw education, regardless of their financial background. I want to make sure that we facilitate an unprecedented undergraduate experience for our students so that our students are successful, that they're able to achieve their hopes and their dreams, and that they are able to aspire to become whatever it is that they want to be in their life post-DePauw.
You come from a family of educators, and I think healthcare professionals as well. Education is in your DNA. Before the pandemic, enormous pressure on universities, and liberal arts universities included, certainly. Reports of potential failures of universities around the country in the coming years because of these unprecedented challenges. As you look at those challenges, what are keys in your view to managing through that process and making DePauw a success in what is a very challenging environment?
There is no shortage of students. If you look at all the students across the country who should have the opportunity for a college education, I mentioned before that my vision for DePauw is that we'd be fully accessible to any student who desires a DePauw education. So certainly, collectively, as a higher ed industry, we all either have to figure out ways to reduce the cost of higher education so that any family can afford to go to college, and or we have to raise more money for scholarships so that, again, a kid who comes from a less wealthy background really can choose any college that he or she might wish to attend. I also think that we have to both focus on the liberal arts, which I think continue to be important, to learn to think well and critically, to be able to write, to be able to communicate, to be able to work in diverse groups. Those are all really important and are the backbone of a liberal arts education. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're fully preparing students not only for the jobs that exist today, but the jobs that have not even been imagined or created, so that our students are able to be nimble once they graduate from any of our institutions across the country.
Still to come, we get a preview of a popular culinary competition in Indianapolis. But first, when Adrian and Tom Doherty hatched a business plan at the kitchen table in Carmel some 20 years ago, they never dreamed that Cardinal Publishers Group would become the largest independent book distributor and publisher in the state. Not only that, Cardinal is one of the largest of its kind in the entire Midwest. The Dohertys talked to Gary Dick about the company's 20 years of success.
Well, I want you to go back now, because any business that can survive 20 years is quite an accomplishment. Think back to when you started the company 20 years ago with this idea around a kitchen table. What was that process? What was it? How did it come about?
Well, basically, I wanted to stay in the book business and remain here in Indiana, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to work with other book publishers, so we figured we'll just do it on our own.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you think back on that, in the beginning, you created a book distributor. That's exclusively what you did. How did things start out at Cardinal?
Our first client actually was based right here in Indiana. It was called Wish Publishing. Yeah. And once we had one client, then we were able to open up accounts with the major wholesalers and retailers, and that gave us the ability to attract other clients. And now we have clients from Europe and Australia and Canada, all across North America.
You've truly become a global distributor, but over time you have also expanded into a number of other related areas, including publishing. Adrian, talk about that, because I know you've got Rubber Ducky Publishing, right? We're doing children's books that have become very popular, and you're expanding that footprint, if you will, beyond Indiana.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always wanted to do children's books, so I started a company called Rubber Ducky Press, and what I do is I do state-by-state ABC books and state-by-state Sweet Dreams books. So one's for a little bit older child, and the other one is for the one who's just learning their ABCs.
Yeah, Adrian, talk about, from a publishing standpoint, all businesses impacted by the pandemic, but just the pandemic on top of changes over time to publishing, whether it be the internet, ebooks, all those types of things. How big of a challenge is that, or does it create opportunities?
I think it's created opportunities for us because we've been able to actually take some time off to go study these locations that we write about, and it's been a little bit good with a little bit of bad. So
right.
What do you think, Tom?
Well, the bricks and mortar business has suffered quite a bit because many of the stores were closed for a couple of months. But electronic books have picked up some of that slack for us. We do distribution for ebooks and audiobooks as well. So those have done pretty well.
Yeah, Tom, in terms of some of the dynamics in the publishing business and the loss of the mall bookstores and those types of things and those traditional bookstores that have kind of gone away, how has that impacted the business?
Well, it used to be the mall store would collect the casual reader and the impulse buyer, whereas the superstore is more of a destination. And even online retailers, people don't browse as much as they would necessarily and pick up an impulse purchase. They go in there and they do their searches, and whatever the online retailer brings up, that's what they have to select from.
All right, going forward, you've been in business 20 years. How about that next 20 years? What will be key to continuing to grow in this environment? Tom, I'll throw that to you.
Well, one of the fastest growing aspects of book publishing is actually audiobooks, downloadable audiobooks. So we'll be looking into that. We've also started with this spring entering into the educational book market. So we've gotten some new lines that appeal to schools and school libraries, and classroom sets. So we're looking to diversify our customer base by increasing the number of markets that we're working to penetrate.
And finally, there is a battle brewing on the Indianapolis burger scene, but it's all for a good cause, to promote quality education for kids in Uganda. This is the 8th year for the nonprofit Building Tomorrow's Indy Burger Battle. Founder George Soror joined us with more on the event, the organization, and how you can get involved.
Let's talk about Building Tomorrow, a nonprofit based here in Indianapolis that has been around now since 2006 and has made an incredible impact in Uganda in terms of education. Talk about your nonprofit, why you put it together, and the impact that it's had.
Sure. Well, I had the chance to serve as an intern with Jim Morris when he was at the World Food Program, and really saw the power that food had in bringing kids to school. And so left college and decided that this was something that would be fun to do. Launched Building Tomorrow, and here we are 14 years later. We've been very fortunate through our time. We've built over 80 schools, and we work with over 120,000 kids each day. And we have a lot more to do, especially in light of what's happening in the world these days.
That is just amazing impact. And you talk about what's going on in the world these days, the COVID-19 pandemic, and I know you've launched a Tomorrow Is Now program, which is directly targeted to the pandemic, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's, the world is facing a pretty significant a cliff, and we're about to see huge numbers of out-of-school children. We have directly enrolled 55,000 out-of-school kids in the last 5 years at Building Tomorrow, and we know that we're going to have our hands really sort of full with the number of kids who have fallen out of the system as a result of school being basically closed since March.
Yeah. I mentioned this Indy Burger Battle. This is the 8th year for it, and again, raises important funds for your organization. Talk about this year, because of the pandemic, you're really expanding it. It used to be a one-day event. Now you've got a passport event that's going to stretch over 10 days, right?
Yeah, so this year is a little bit different. We used to have an afternoon where we last year had over 1,100 people come together and sample burgers from different restaurants from around town. This year we're going to change it up a bit, and we're going to send people out to the restaurants themselves over a 10-day period, starting today through August 9th, and have a chance to sample burgers from some of Indy's best.
Yeah, and again, this is a way to give back to the restaurants as well, who've suffered during the pandemic, by making this a 10-day event and stretching it out a bit.
Exactly, and they're game for carryout or having you come and dine in. It's a pretty simple process, and at the end of it all, we'll collect people's votes and see who again has the best burger in Indianapolis.
That's great. Okay, and again, the Indy Burger Battle, information on that can be found online as well. It goes to a great cause. George, as we wrap up, 30 seconds left, but as you look at what's next, getting through the pandemic here and your impact on the education education in Uganda and beyond? Where do you see that going?
You know, I think we have a really tremendous opportunity right now. I think for a long time, education had been sort of chronically underfunded and sort of disregarded. But we're realizing now the importance of making sure that kids are in school. We know, even from what's happening here in our own backyard in Indianapolis, that it's important for kids to be in school. And we're poised, I think, with the experience that we have as an organization to make a significant difference in the long term.
That wraps up this week's Inside Indiana Business Television podcast. Remember, you can find all of this week's TV segments, as well as the top business news from throughout the state at InsideIndianaBusiness.com. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to our platform of free e-newsletters. This is Alex Brown for Inside Indiana Business.